shopping a necessary chore or time well spent? When talking about shopping, we are quite often thinking about how much money we spend, without reflecting as much on how much time it took us. I believe nowadays we also need to make wise decisions on how we spend our time on shopping. In 2010, when e-commerce just started its rapid development, people were shifting to this channel because they believed it would help them to save time. But would you consider spending 60 to 80 minutes on grocery shopping online as a time-saving exercise? Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, who is considered one of the founders of existential psychology, highlighted that our sense of time is inherently subjective. Perception of time is also subjective when we're talking about purchase decisions. In the last decade, e-commerce has been seen as an amazing development, and many of us expected it to save us time. But yet, we still spend around 10 days on shopping-related activities in a year. Let's think about this number. 10 days equals 240 hours, or 14,400 minutes, or 864,000 seconds. Can this time be considered well spent? Not all purchases are equal. Some are a chore, others we regret. My PhD research showed that different types of purchases have different natures and underlying mechanisms. I'm sure some of you have heard that traditional economic models suppose that people are making very rational decisions, meaning that an individual goes to an e-commerce or offline store with a list of products in mind, gets all they planned, and then leaves the store in the fastest and most efficient way possible. How many of you are making purchases only like this? Right. We don't always make only rational or planned purchases. Sometimes we do things differently. In my research, I found that beyond planned purchases, there are two other very distinct types of purchases: unplanned and impulse. For example, unplanned purchases are ones which are not determined before entering the store, but they are quite often associated with an existing need state. For example, last month I was planning my trip to Tenerife, and I needed to buy sunscreen. I went to a drugstore to buy something else, and while browsing through the shelves, I noticed sunscreen with a very attractive offer. Although I was not planning to get it today, I decided to take an opportunity and make the purchase. Have you ever experienced something similar? In terms of the underlying mechanisms of the purchase decision-making process, my research showed that in the first 5 seconds after a consumer saw a product, there was very strong heart rate activation. Because right after you see a product, it immediately resonates with your need state, and you get this kind of aha moment. For example, when you're going to buy shampoo, your need state is actually to buy products for hair treatment. So everything that appeals to this need state gets an immediate resonance in your brain, and as a result, might be bought, even if it isn't in the initial shopping list. Eventually, the subjective experience of a consumer with this type of purchase, because they believe they get a clear benefit, is time well spent. We all know that impulse purchases are often associated with spontaneous decision-making. Indeed, my research showed that they are often related to strong emotional activation at the final stage of the purchase decision-making process. But when is the exact moment when we decide to make an impulse purchase? Let's imagine, while browsing for a shampoo, a consumer notices a new collection of nail polish. One of those colors looks so attractive. She's not sure that she will use this nail polish, but she really likes it. So she buys the product. You could imagine that this decision was made in the spur of the moment. However, previous fMRI research shows that we are actually making a decision to buy 8 to 12 seconds before we put a product in our basket. And this is exactly the time when we see heart rate activation for impulse purchases. You just lean in and follow your emotional trigger. Now I'll tell you why it all matters. After I finalized my PhD, the pandemic began. And at the same time, I started working at TikTok. It was an incredible time to join the platform. Every day, I was observing the important role which communities were playing in our lives and helping us to overcome the challenges. It was also the time when community commerce started its rapid development. I'm sure you heard or experienced by yourself how online communities inspired ideas of new recipes to the point that stores were even running out of some ingredients. Indeed, research shows that more than 70% of consumers agree that social media platforms have inspired them to make purchases even when they were not looking to shop. Applying the research methodology, which I developed during my PhD, my team and I found that 63% of purchases inspired by social media platforms can be classified as unplanned. Interestingly, this finding also stayed very consistent across a broad range of product categories. Let's imagine, while browsing through your favorite social media platform, you notice a story from a creator who shares the experience with a virtual walking challenge. With that challenge, they visited so many parts of the world and got so much inspiration to exercise more. Although you were not planning to get this challenge today, it resonates a lot with your need state to do more exercise. So you take the opportunity and make the purchase. Crucially, users on the platform were describing this community-inspired shopping experience as time well spent. In a nutshell, with these new modes of making purchases, the question, was that time well spent, becomes even more relevant. What is important to remember is that the answer will always be very subjective and will depend on a specific situation. While sometimes I may enjoy getting inspiration on social media platforms, in other cases I may rather prefer to recharge and unwind in a bookstore, browsing the shelves with my friend. So, let's come back to the question we opened with. We are spending 14,400 minutes every year on making purchases, while mostly thinking about how we are spending our money. How can we be more careful about spending our time? Let's take a step back and see what could be a good investment of our time on shopping. Spending time with your friends in a bookstore, browsing shelves with fiction books? Of course, if it brings you joy and sparks interesting conversations. You may even discover something totally unexpected and make an impulse purchase of a book, which will eventually be a big highlight for your weekend. What about visiting a number of toy stores after a busy day at work to get a specific toy for your nephew's birthday? Maybe at that time, it may not feel as time well spent. Your nephew may be rather annoying after all, and the toy he wants may look a little bit ridiculous to you. But seeing their joy makes it all worth it. Or spending an hour reading reviews about two similar-looking pairs of shoes from brands you've never heard of before and which you discovered while checking news online. And eventually getting both because you couldn't decide between them. That might be my story. Yeah, that wasn't time well spent. So, these stories remind us that shopping can be quite exhausting. It may drain a lot of our energy, and sometimes it takes a lot of our time. As I mentioned, Søren Kierkegaard's works remind us about the subjectivity of time. This subjective perception serves as our truth, and so the same experience can be time well spent for one person and not for another. As with many aspects of our life, not all purchases are the same. Eventually, it all turns out to be an interplay of time, money, and our subjective experience. So, I propose you to follow these three main considerations so that you can evaluate your shopping experience. First, consider counting the actual time it takes you on shopping. Maybe it's worth putting a timer right after you open the page of an e-commerce store and then stopping it when you are ready with making purchases. You may be surprised by how long it actually takes. Making a decision not to do so may indicate that the chronometric time is not important in that specific case, and you are actually looking for something more than just making purchases. Second, reflect that instead of browsing a store or watching videos with lots of ads, there is any other alternative for your time. Is there any other type of activity which can bring you even more joy? And eventually, ask yourself, can this specific shopping experience be considered time well spent? Thank you.